The garage was settling into that quiet moment just before dusk, when engines stopped roaring and started ticking as they cooled. The air was thick with oil, metal, and sweat. A couple of bikers laughed near a workbench, voices low and rough, until the old bay door creaked open and every sound died at once. A small boy stood there, framed by fading light. His jacket was too thin for the evening chill. His hands trembled at his sides. His eyes were red, swollen, and desperate. He didn't belong in a place like this, and every man in the room knew it the second they saw him. The boy swallowed hard and forced the words out, his voice cracking in a way that cut deeper than shouting ever could. He said his grandma was locked in the basement. Not taken by strangers, not lost. Locked away by her own blood. The name Maeve Mercer meant nothing to the bikers yet, but the danger was clear. An old woman trapped, isolated, cut off from help. Time was already working against her. Fear was doing the rest. Ridge Iron, Calder saw it immediately in the boy's face. Real terror. The kind you don't fake. The garage fell silent. No vote was called. No discussion needed. Ridge reached for his cut, met the boy's eyes, and said one word. Show us. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop it in the comments. If this story hits you, subscribe. Ridge Iron. Calder didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He was tall in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with presence. Scars traced his knuckles, his forearms, the side of his neck disappearing beneath worn leather, each one earned and remembered. As president of the Black Hollow Motorcycle Club, Ridge carried himself with a calm that only came from surviving things that broke other men. He was not known for mercy, but for restraint, and in his world restraint carried more weight than rage. When Ridge stood still, the room adjusted around him. Conversation softened, movements slowed. Silence followed. He lived by a code that never needed to be spoken out loud. Protect the innocent. Finish what you start. Never abandon the vulnerable. Those rules weren't stitched onto a patch or written on a wall. They were proven, again and again, by action. Ridge had buried brothers, walked away from blood he could have spilled, and stayed when leaving would have been easier. That was why men followed him without question. At his right hand was Knox Lockjaw Hale, a man who spoke little and noticed everything. Knox had the kind of stillness that made people uneasy, like a blade resting flat on a table. He handled security and logistics with the same precision he brought to violence when it was unavoidable. Doors, locks, lines of sight, exits. Knox saw the structure beneath chaos. When Ridge decided something needed doing, Knox figured out how it would be done without mistakes. Mace Rowan, the road captain, lived in motion. He watched angles, measured distances, read threats before they formed into action. Where Ridge was the anchor, Mace was the compass. He controlled movement, placement, and timing, making sure the club was never where the danger expected them to be. His eyes were always working, his jaw always tight, as if the world might lunge at any moment. Ash Stillwater. Voss was different. Assigned as a watchman, Ash had a calm that unsettled aggressors more than shouting ever could. He sat still for long stretches, barely moving, his presence heavy and unavoidable. Trouble didn't know how to deal with someone who refused to rise to it. Ash didn't threaten. He waited. And waiting, in the right hands, became a weapon. Then there was Crow, the scout. He moved ahead of the pack, unnoticed, gathering information before anyone realized they were being observed. Crow saw headlights in the distance, unfamiliar faces in familiar places, patterns that didn't belong. By the time danger arrived, the club already knew it was coming. Together with the rest of the rotating brothers, they formed something larger than individuals. The brotherhood wasn't loud. It didn't posture. It showed up. Groceries appeared without fanfare. Watches rotated through the night. Repairs were made quietly. Unity was their strength, patience their shield. Chaos was for amateurs. Against them stood a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. Cole Mercer carried fear in his shoulders and courage in his eyes. He had learned responsibility through necessity, not choice. Silence had been drilled into him, but desperation cracked it open. What strength he had came, not from size or certainty, but from love, strong enough to override terror. Maeve Mercer had once been the center of a warm home, a widow, a grandmother, a woman who had given more than she had ever kept. Over time, manipulation had worn her down. Threats had trained her into quiet. She wasn't weak, she was conditioned. Every flinch, every hesitation, was the result of survival. She was a survivor in waiting, still breathing, still enduring, still hoping someone might notice before it was too late. The man who turned that home into a cage was Doyle Mercer, her son. He wore the disguise of family well enough to fool outsiders, but beneath it, he was a parasite. He fed on control, on money that wasn't his, on fear he manufactured and maintained. He didn't use fists unless cornered. Fear was cheaper. Fear lasted longer. He justified everything with obligation and blood while draining both dry. When Doyle needed muscle, he didn't look for loyalty. He found drifters promised quick money and easy intimidation, men who didn't ask questions because questions cost time. They didn't know the real stakes. They didn't know who they were stepping toward. All of this unfolded in a Rust Belt town with long memories and short patience. A place where factories had closed, but grudges stayed open. People minded their business because minding someone else's could get you hurt. Help didn't come quickly, and trust came even slower. The Mercer house sat like a held breath, once warm, now suffocating. Windows closed too tight, doors locked too often. Silence pressed in from the walls. It was a place where time dragged and hope thinned. The garage, by contrast, looked dangerous from the outside. Oil stains, roaring engines, men with hard faces and harder reputations. But inside, it was a sanctuary, not because it was gentle, but because it was honest. What you saw was what you got. And when the vulnerable crossed its threshold, they weren't turned away. Loyalty without noise, strength without spectacle. Justice without cruelty. That was the atmosphere Cole walked into. That was the force Doyle underestimated. Cole didn't talk much once Ridge told him to lead the way. The boy just nodded hard, like if he spoke again he might fall apart. Ridge followed with the steady stride of a man who'd walked into worse places than this and never blinked. Knox moved alongside them, quiet as shadow, eyes working the whole time. Windows, alleys, the angle of the streetlights coming on as dusk bled into night. The town around them looked normal in that tired Rust Belt way, cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, porches with old chairs that had seen too many seasons. Normal was a mask. Ridge had learned long ago that the ugliest things in life rarely happened in dramatic places. They happened in houses that looked just like every other house. Cole led them down a narrow street where the homes sat tight together, each one with its own small patch of yard. He stopped at a faded place with peeling paint and a porch that sagged at the steps. The Mercer house. Even from the sidewalk, it felt wrong. The windows were shut too tight. Curtains drawn where daylight should have been. The air around it had a heavy silence to it, like the house was holding its breath. Cole didn't go to the front door. He went around the side, toward a weathered basement entry that sat half below ground. Ridge watched the boy's hands as he pointed. They shook. His eyes kept flicking toward the street, like he expected someone to appear at any second. "There," Cole whispered, voice raw. The door was metal, old and dented, and the padlock on it was new, not a rusted, forgotten lock. A clean one. Intentional. Ridge crouched down and ran 2 fingers over the lock, then looked at Knox without speaking. Knox's jaw tightened. He didn't need explanation. A lock like that didn't belong on a basement door unless someone wanted what was inside to stay inside. Ridge pressed his ear close to the door for a second. Nothing. Not because it was empty, but because whoever was down there had learned not to waste breath. He rose slowly, eyes on Cole. "You did good coming to us," he said, low enough that it didn't feel like a speech, just a fact. Knox stepped forward. He didn't pull tools out like some loud display. He simply produced a compact set from his cut, hands moving with calm, practiced certainty. A few controlled motions. A muted snap. The lock fell away. When the door creaked open, the smell hit them first. Stale air, damp concrete, something faintly sour that told Ridge this wasn't a place meant for living. Cold rushed out like the basement had been saving it. Cole flinched and stepped back, But he didn't run. That mattered. The boy was terrified, but he was anchored by something stronger than fear. Ridge took the first step down. The staircase was narrow and steep, wooden steps worn smooth. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, weak and flickering, casting thin light across bare concrete walls. It didn't look like a crime scene from a movie. It looked like neglect. Like slow, deliberate cruelty. Maeve Mercer lay on a thin mattress near the back wall, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't warm enough. Her hair was gray and tangled. Her face was hollow in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with deprivation. Her eyes opened slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. When she saw Ridge and Knox, she tensed, instinctively pulling her arms closer to her body, as if bracing for punishment. She tried to sit up and couldn't manage it at first. Ridge moved closer, slow, showing his hands. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you're not alone anymore." Maeve blinked at him, confusion and shame mixing in her expression. Shame was always there first with people like this. Shame came before anger. Shame came before relief. She looked past Ridge, past Knox, until her eyes found Cole at the top of the stairs. The boy swallowed hard. "Grandma," he whispered. Maeve's lips trembled. She didn't cry loud. She just let out a sound like breath finally escaping after being held too long. Ridge had seen that sound before. It was what happened when someone realized the nightmare might actually end. Knox scanned the space while Ridge helped Maeve sit up. The basement wasn't just a room. It was a statement. No furniture besides the mattress. No comfort, no dignity. A bucket in the corner, a cracked plastic cup. The kind of setup that told you the person upstairs didn't see the person down here as human. Ridge lifted Maeve carefully, feeling how light she was, how weak. She clung to his jacket sleeve with thin fingers, as if stability itself was unfamiliar. They brought her up, step by step. Cole hovered close, his small hands ready to help even though he couldn't carry her weight. Ridge let the boys stay near because it mattered. Cole needed to see this through. He needed proof that choosing help had been the right choice. Upstairs, the house was dim and stale, like it hadn't been open to fresh air in weeks. It wasn't messy in a normal way. It was controlled. Certain rooms looked too untouched, like someone didn't want signs of life in them. Ridge's eyes caught small details that told the story without words. Cabinet doors that had been searched through, drawers half closed but not neat, a table with a single chair set out like only one person was meant to eat. Maeve sat on the couch, trembling. She kept looking toward the front door, as if expecting it to fly open. When Ridge asked if she wanted water, she nodded like she was afraid to ask for anything. Her mouth opened once, then closed. She hesitated like she was choosing each word against a lifetime of consequences. He said, "It was for my own good," she finally managed, voice thin and cracked. Ridge didn't react with shock. He'd heard that line before. Knox moved through the house without making noise. He went to the kitchen wall and stopped. The phone should have been there. The space was empty. Knox checked the landline outlet. The cord was gone. He traced the line toward the baseboard and found it cut. Not unplugged. Cut. A clean slice. He walked back and met Ridge's eyes. "Phones are gone," he said quietly. "Lines cut." Maeve flinched at the words, shoulders rising like she expected them to trigger fury. She wasn't used to people hearing the truth and staying calm. She was used to the truth being met with punishment. Ridge took a slow breath and let the silence sit for a second, not to build drama, but because the gravity of it deserved space. Then he crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over Maeve. "This ain't family help," he said. "This is a cage." Maeve's eyes filled, but she shook her head like she wanted to deny it even now. "He's my son," she whispered, like that explained everything. "That's what makes it worse," Ridge answered. Cole sat at the edge of the couch, still close enough to Maeve to touch her sleeve, like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Ridge watched the boy's face. There was guilt there. The kind of guilt kids carry when adults fail them. Cole had been passing water through a cracked door, listening to coughing through floorboards. Living inside fear that had nowhere to go. Every day he'd stayed quiet had probably felt like betrayal. Every day he'd wanted to speak had probably felt like a death sentence. Now he'd spoken. Now the whole world had shifted. Ridge stood and looked around the room. The house wasn't just a home, it was evidence. The lock, the basement, the missing phone, the cut line. A pattern built with intent. This was the moment everything changed because the lie couldn't survive light. Whatever story Doyle Mercer planned to tell, about confusion, about safety, about a mother who needed supervision, it collapsed. The second Maeve was seen, the second the lock was broken, the second the proof was visible. Ridge made the call in his head before he ever said it out loud. This wasn't a favor. This wasn't something you did and walked away from. This was protection, and protection meant staying until the danger was finished. Knox pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. The padlock, the cut line, the basement setup, quiet documentation, steady hands. Not because Knox trusted the system blindly, but because he understood something Ridge had taught the club long ago: if you want a clean ending, you build a clean case. Maeve watched Knox with wide eyes. "Is he coming back?" she asked, barely louder than a breath. Ridge didn't lie to her. "Yeah," he said, "he'll come back. Men like him always do. They don't let go of control easy." Cole's shoulders tightened. Maeve's fingers gripped the couch cushion like she might sink into it. Ridge looked toward the front window, then back at Knox. "We rotate," he said. "No gaps. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Until this is handled right." Knox nodded once. He was already thinking through shifts, angles, sightlines, who would take first watch, who would sleep in short stretches. The club didn't need a speech to understand what this meant. The moment the lock came off that basement door, Black Hollow was in it. Ridge stepped onto the porch and scanned the street as the last of the daylight drained away. Somewhere out there, Doyle Mercer was moving through his evening, thinking his house was still his kingdom. Thinking his fear still worked. Thinking his mother still belonged in the dark. Ridge's jaw tightened. He didn't feel rage the way most men did. He felt something colder, a certainty. The club was involved now, whether the town liked it or not. And when Doyle came back, he wasn't coming back to silence anymore. Doyle Mercer came back just after full dark, the kind of dark that made porch lights feel weak and streets feel empty even when they weren't. His car rolled up slow, like he was already tasting victory, like he expected the house to sit quiet and obedient the way it always had. He cut the engine and stepped out with a grocery bag in one hand and a set of keys in the other, moving with the lazy confidence of a man who believed fear was permanent. Then he saw the motorcycles. Not lined up like a show, not staged like a threat. Just there, steady and unmoving, clustered near the curb as if they'd always belonged. Two men sat on the porch steps. Ash Stillwater, Voss, and one of the other brothers, silent silhouettes under the porch light. Knox stood off to the side, half shadow, watching Doyle without giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. Doyle froze for half a second. He masked it quick, shifting his posture, tightening his face into something hard. But Ridge saw it from inside the doorway. That tiny pause was the moment Doyle realized control wasn't automatic anymore. "What the hell is this?" Doyle called out, voice loud on purpose, carrying down the street like he wanted neighbors to hear. He swung his gaze around as if the world owed him an explanation. "Who are you people?" Ridge stepped onto the porch with calm weight, his cut hanging open, his hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't look like a man preparing to fight. He looked like a man preparing to end something. "You live here?" Ridge asked, not accusing, just measuring. Doyle let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Yeah, I live here. This is my house." Ridge didn't blink. "House belongs to Maeve." At Maeve's name, Doyle's eyes tightened. He took a step forward and lifted his chin like he was about to teach a lesson. "That's my mother," he snapped, like blood gave him ownership. "You don't know what you're talking about. She's confused. She's old. She needs help, and I'm the one handling it." His voice was practiced, Ridge could tell. This wasn't the first time Doyle had rehearsed that line in his head. Confused. Old. Needs help. Those were the words men used when they wanted to bury someone alive without getting dirt on their hands. Ridge moved one step down from the porch, enough to meet Doyle in the yard space, enough to keep the line between them clean. "You lock your mother in a basement to help her?" Ridge asked, still calm. Doyle's face flashed anger, surprise, then quick calculation. Basement? He scoffed. She was down there for her own safety. She wanders, she falls. She doesn't remember. You strangers don't come into my house and— Don't, Maeve said. One word, quiet but sharp, cut through Doyle's noise like a blade. Everyone turned. Maeve stood in the doorway behind Ridge. Her shoulders still looked fragile, but she was upright. Her hands weren't shaking the way they had earlier. Cole was beside her, close enough to touch her sleeve, eyes locked on Doyle like a small animal watching the thing that hurt it. Doyle's expression shifted when he saw Maeve standing. For a moment his mask slipped, revealing raw irritation, like seeing her upright offended him. Then he softened his face into something fake and concerned. "Ma," he said, voice suddenly sweet. "What are you doing up? You're not supposed to be." "I was locked," Maeve said, her voice steadier than anyone expected. "Locked with a padlock. And you cut my phone line." Doyle's jaw clenched. He spread his hands wide like a man explaining to children. "I took the phone because you were calling people and saying crazy things." "You were confused." "You were." Maeve didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You were taking my money," she said. The yard went still. Doyle's eyes darted to Ridge, then to Knox, then back to Maeve, like he was trying to find the weak point in the circle forming around him. "That's not true," he snapped. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know what you bought," Maeve replied, calm as winter. "I know where my pension went. I know what you spent it on. And I know what you drank it away with." Cole's breath hitched at the sharpness in her tone. Ridge watched Maeve carefully. This wasn't rage. This was clarity. The kind of clarity that came after someone finally felt believed. Doyle's face reddened. "You're gonna stand there and accuse me?" he growled, the sweetness gone. He looked at Ridge again, voice rising. "You're gonna take a senile old woman's words over mine?" Ridge's voice stayed low. "We don't need words. We got a lock. A cut line. A basement set up like a cage." Doyle took another step forward, not at Ridge exactly, but toward the doorway, toward Maeve and Cole. Ash shifted on the porch, subtle but unmistakable. Knox angled his body, creating a barrier without making a show of it. The brothers didn't reach for weapons. They didn't puff up. They simply moved like a wall. Doyle noticed. He stopped. "This is family business," Doyle said, trying a different angle, voice sharper but controlled again. "You bikers, whatever you are, this ain't your problem. You think you're heroes? You think you can roll in and—" Ridge interrupted him, still calm. "Family business don't include padlocks." Doyle stared at Ridge with hate that was almost childish. "So what, you gonna beat me up in my own yard? That what you do? Pretend you got a code while you terrorize people?" Ridge took a breath, then looked at Doyle like he was something small pretending to be large. "You got two choices," Ridge said. "You walk away. Right now, take what you can carry that's yours and leave this house. Or we remove you. And either way, the next call is to the law." Doyle laughed again, but this time it sounded thin. "You can't just tell me to leave." Ridge's eyes didn't change. "Watch." Doyle's gaze slid past Ridge, searching for sympathy, searching for hesitation. He found none. He looked at Maeve again and tried to stab her with words instead of fists. "You're gonna regret this," he said softly, the threat sharp in its quiet. "You push me out, and you'll be alone. Nobody stays. Not for you. Not for him." Cole flinched, but Maeve didn't step back. She stood straighter, like those words had lost their teeth. Ridge stepped closer to Doyle, enough that Doyle could smell oil and leather and certainty. "You threaten them again," Ridge said, voice like stone, "and you don't get the choice." Doyle's nostrils flared. He wanted to swing. Ridge saw it. Knox saw it. Ash saw it. But Doyle didn't. Men like Doyle didn't fight when the odds were even. They fought when someone was trapped. He spat on the ground instead, grabbed his grocery bag like it had suddenly become an insult, and shoved past his own car door. "Fine," he snarled. "You want to play tough? Play tough. I'll be back. And you won't be standing here forever." He slammed the door, tires squealing as he pulled away too fast, like speed could replace power. The street went quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a warning shot. Inside the house, Cole finally let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. He kept watching the window even after the car disappeared, expecting it to turn around. Maeve's hands trembled now that the confrontation was over, the delayed reaction hitting her body. Ridge didn't tell her to calm down. He didn't try to talk her out of fear. He simply nodded at Knox, then at Ash. "Rotation stays," Ridge said. That night, the brothers moved with disciplined purpose. One took the porch. One stayed near the back. One watched the street from a distance. Not to intimidate, to protect. Cole curled up on the couch with a blanket that smelled like clean laundry instead of damp basement air. Maeve sat in a chair nearby, eyes heavy, still startled by the fact that nobody was yelling at her for speaking. Ridge remained awake longer than the others, sitting in a corner where he could see both doors. He watched the shadows on the walls shift with passing headlights. He listened for footsteps on the porch. He didn't trust the quiet, because he knew men like Doyle didn't accept being exposed. They retreated, they regrouped, and they came back meaner. In a bar across town, Doyle did exactly that. He drank hard, not to celebrate but to burn the humiliation out of his throat. He told anyone who would listen that bikers had invaded his house, that his mother was crazy, that he was being robbed of what was rightfully his. Each lie was smoother than the last because the truth tasted too bitter. And then he started whispering something else, quieter, more dangerous, not just complaints. Plans, names of men who liked quick cash, men who didn't mind intimidation, men who could be pointed at a problem and told to make it disappear. Back at the Mercer house, Cole slept through the night for the first time in weeks. No coughing through floorboards. No keys rattling above him. No fear of footsteps coming down the stairs. Maeve woke before dawn and stood at the kitchen window, watching a biker on the porch shift his weight as the morning cold rolled in. She didn't look like a woman waiting for punishment anymore. She looked like someone remembering what air felt like. Ridge stepped beside her, gaze on the street. "This ends the right way," he said. "Not a promise meant to comfort, but a vow meant to finish. Not fast." "Final." Maeve nodded slowly. She didn't fully understand what that would cost yet. But Ridge did. Doyle Mercer didn't come back the next morning. He didn't come back that afternoon either. For a few hours, the quiet tried to pretend it was peace, like the house could settle into normal if everyone stopped looking at the doors. But Ridge didn't buy it. Men like Doyle didn't disappear when they lost control. They stepped back long enough to find a way to take it back without having to face the truth. Inside the Mercer house, Maeve moved carefully, like her body still expected the basement's walls to close in again. She kept her voice low, even when nobody was threatening her. She flinched when a floorboard popped. She stared too long at the phone Knox handed her, new, charged, ready-like. It was a weapon she didn't know how to hold. Cole stayed close, never more than a few feet away, his eyes always shifting to the windows, his shoulders tense like a dog that had been kicked one too many times. The club kept their rotation, quiet men on the porch, quiet bikes on the curb. The brothers didn't hang around inside the house unless needed. They didn't crowd Maeve. They didn't make her feel like she'd traded one kind of control for another. They simply stayed present, a steady line that said, "You are not alone," and still, tension built. Knox had called law enforcement once the evidence was documented, but it didn't move like a dramatic rescue story. It moved like a system, slow, cautious, skeptical. A local officer had shown up first and tried to shrink the situation into something small: family dispute, misunderstanding, adult son caring for an aging mother. The kind of lazy explanation people used when the truth was too ugly to deal with. Ridge didn't argue loudly, he didn't threaten. He simply laid out facts. Padlock. Cut line. Missing phone. Basement conditions. Maeve's statement. Cole's statement. Knox's photos. A timeline. The officer's face tightened, but hesitation remained in his eyes. "We need more," he said, like the lock wasn't enough, like Maeve's frail body wasn't enough, like a scared child wasn't enough. Knox didn't lash out. He nodded once, jaw tight, and said, "You'll get more." That's what made it worse for Maeve. The fact that the world didn't snap into place the second she was freed. The fact that truth still had to fight paperwork. She kept asking quietly, "What if he comes back before it's finished?" What if he brings somebody? What if he— Ridge listened without cutting her off. He knew fear didn't disappear just because a door opened. Fear left slowly, dragging its nails along the floor as it went. "We're here," Ridge told her. "He comes back. He meets us first." Maeve nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. She had lived too long under Doyle's shadow to trust that protection could last. By late afternoon, Crow rolled into the street like he'd been summoned by instinct. His bike didn't roar. It purred. Controlled. He didn't pull up to the porch like a messenger delivering drama. He parked a little down the block, cut the engine, and walked up with his eyes already scanning. Ridge stepped out before Crow even spoke. One look at Crow's face told him the shape of the news. "2 vehicles," Crow said, voice low. "Coming in from the West Road. Moving slow. Not locals." The air around the house changed. The brothers on rotation straightened slightly. Knox shifted his stance. Cole, inside, pressed his face to the living room curtain without realizing he'd moved. Maeve heard it too, not the vehicles yet, but the shift in the men outside. Her hands went cold. "Is it him?" she asked, voice thin. Ridge didn't lie. "Yeah," he said. "It's him." The town stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that pretended it didn't see trouble rolling in. Ridge could feel the hesitation in the air, like curtains twitching in houses nearby as people watched from behind fabric and fear. Nobody wanted to be involved. Nobody wanted to be the one Doyle decided to punish next. Ridge looked toward the end of the street. He couldn't see headlights yet, but he could hear the distant hum. It was faint, but steady, like a clock starting to tick louder. Knox stepped closer. "You want the call made again?" he asked. Ridge nodded. "Make it. Tell 'em we've got incoming. Tell 'em it's escalating. Tell 'em if they're gonna act, now's the time." Knox pulled his phone out and walked a few steps away, speaking in a calm voice that held steel underneath. Ridge stayed on the porch, eyes forward. He could feel Maeve behind him in the doorway, standing there like she was forcing herself not to hide. Cole was beside her, small hand wrapped around her sleeve like he was anchoring both of them. Maeve's breath came fast. "I don't want him to hurt you," she whispered, not fully understanding what she was saying. She'd spent so long believing danger belonged only to her that the idea of it touching someone else felt like her fault. Ridge didn't look back. "He won't," he said. But even as he said it, Ridge felt the old memory rise in him like smoke. A different street, years ago. Different house, different victim. A call that came too late. A door he kicked in and found someone already broken beyond repair. A child who didn't make it. A woman who never got the chance to stand in a doorway like Maeve stood now. He remembered the sound of his own breathing that night. Heavy, angry, useless. He remembered the feeling of arriving after the ending had already happened. He remembered swearing to himself that he would never let time beat him like that again. That was the truth behind Ridge's code. It wasn't just honor. It was regret sharpened into law. "This time," Ridge muttered, barely audible, "I don't blink." Crow moved down the sidewalk toward the corner, acting as eyes in the street. Mace appeared from across the way, like he'd been there the whole time, positioning himself where he could see both directions. Ash remained on the porch, still as stone, the kind of stillness that made threats hesitate. The hum grew louder. Then the first headlights appeared at the far end of the street, washing pale light across cracked pavement. 2 vehicles. A dark pickup leading, an older sedan behind it. They rolled slow, deliberate, like predators circling before they strike. Cole's grip tightened on Maeve's sleeve. Maeve's chest rose and fell too fast. Ridge felt their fear like heat at his back, and it steadied him instead of shaking him. This was why he was here. This was why the club stayed. The pickup came closer, and Ridge could make out silhouettes inside. Too many. The sedan behind it carried more shapes. Men who didn't belong here. Men who didn't know this street, didn't know this house, didn't know the people they were about to threaten. But they knew Doyle's voice. They knew Doyle's money. That was enough for them. The pickup stopped in the middle of the street, not even pulling to the curb. A statement. The sedan stopped behind it, boxing the road like they owned it. Doyle stepped out first, jaw clenched, eyes burning. He wasn't carrying groceries now. He wasn't pretending to be a son. He was carrying humiliation like gasoline, and he had brought matches. 2 men climbed out behind him from the pickup, another from the sedan. Big shoulders, hard faces. The kind of muscle hired for intimidation, not truth. They looked at the motorcycles, then at Ridge, then at the house, and something in their posture shifted, like they hadn't expected this to be so serious. Doyle pointed toward the porch. "That's them," he said, loud enough for the street to hear. "Get them out of my house." Ridge stepped down off the porch, slow and controlled, moving into the space between Doyle and the doorway. Mace drifted to the edge of the yard, ready. Ash stayed behind Ridge, silent support. Crow stood closer to the corner, watching for any more vehicles. Knox returned from his call, sliding into position without a word. His eyes flicked to Ridge, a silent update. The authorities were on the way, but on the way could mean anything in a town that didn't like trouble. Maeve stayed in the doorway, trembling but visible. Cole stayed beside her, eyes wide, face pale. Ridge glanced back once, just enough to meet Maeve's gaze. She looked terrified, but she was standing. That mattered. The streetlights buzzed overhead. Headlights cut across leather and denim. The air felt thinner, as if it couldn't hold both fear and courage at once. Doyle took a step forward. Ridge took one too, matching him, holding the line. The clock ticked loud now, measured in the distance between them, and the street became exactly what Ridge knew it would become. The second crow, said 2 vehicles. A line in the sand. Mace Rowan stepped into the street like he'd been born for moments like this. Not rushing, not strutting. Just moving forward with a steady, measured pace until he stood between the pickup's headlights and the Mercer house. The beams wrapped around him, throwing his shadow long behind him like a warning. He lifted his hands, not in surrender, not in fear, but open and visible. Calm. Controlled. A man showing he wasn't there to start a fight, but he wasn't going to step aside either. Doyle's hired men watched Mace the way predators watched something they didn't understand. They'd expected shouting, weapons, chaos. They'd expected bikers to be loud, stupid, and reckless. Instead, they got silence and composure. That kind of calm made men nervous because it suggested a deeper kind of violence, one that didn't need emotion to justify itself. Doyle stood beside his truck with his fists clenched, face tight with frustration. He wanted Mace to flinch. He wanted someone to shout back. He wanted the story to play the way he'd rehearsed it in his head. Strangers trespassing, him reclaiming what was his, the whole street watching him restore order. But the street didn't bend for him the way it used to. Mace kept his hands up and his voice low. "This ain't your stage," he said. "And you brought the wrong crowd," Doyle scoffed, turning to his men like he needed them to witness his power. "Get him out of the way," he snapped. "Then we go inside and take back what's mine." That was when the first motorcycle rolled in from the far end of the street. The sound wasn't loud at first, just a deep rumble, steady and deliberate, like thunder taking its time. A headlight appeared, then the bike itself, easing into the street behind Mace. The rider didn't rev for attention. He didn't blast music. He just parked at an angle, engine still running, the vibration humming through the pavement like a warning heartbeat. Then another bike came. Then another. One by one, they arrived from different directions, as if the whole town had a pulse, and it beat toward this moment. The Black Hollow brothers didn't pour in like a mob. They arrived like a formation. A semicircle behind Mace, engines rumbling low, not shouting but speaking in a language every man on that street understood. Judgment. Doyle's hired men shifted their weight. Their confidence began to leak away. The pickup's driver glanced at the growing line of bikes, then at Doyle, then back at the house, as if re-evaluating what he'd signed up for. This wasn't a quick intimidation job anymore. This was a situation with witnesses, numbers, and consequences. Doyle saw it too, and rage flared in his face like he could burn reality into obeying him. He took a step forward, pointing at Ridge as Ridge came down the porch steps and moved to stand just behind Mace. "This is my mother," Doyle shouted, voice cracking at the edges. "This is my house. You think you can take it from me?" Ridge didn't answer him right away. He didn't give Doyle the satisfaction of a debate. He stepped forward slowly, his boots hitting pavement with controlled weight. He stopped just far enough away to keep the line clear. Then Ridge did something that made Doyle's throat tighten. He didn't look at Doyle. He looked at the hired men, the drifters, the muscle, the outsiders who didn't have history here, the ones who were only here because they'd been promised cash and a simple job. Ridge's voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "You fellas know what you're doing?" he asked. One of them snorted, trying to hold on to pride. "We're handling a situation." Ridge nodded slightly, like he accepted that answer. Then he tipped his head toward the Mercer house. "You see that doorway?" he asked. The men's eyes followed. Maeve stood there, framed by porch light, shoulders squared despite the tremble in her hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. Cole stood beside her, pressed close, one hand clutching her sleeve, the other curled into a fist so small it looked like it might break. They didn't look like criminals. They didn't look like threats. They looked like people who had been hurt too long. Ridge kept his gaze on the hired men. "That's an old woman," he said. "And that's a kid. You're here to scare them back into a basement?" One of the men shifted uncomfortably. Another frowned, eyes narrowing, as if the truth was becoming visible for the first time. The driver of the sedan glanced toward Doyle like he suddenly didn't want to be tied to him. Doyle snapped, "Don't listen to him. She's confused." "She's—" Ridge finally looked at Doyle for the briefest second. The look wasn't angry. It was flat. Then Ridge turned back to the hired men again. "You were told this was family business," Ridge said. "You were told this was a man taking care of his mother. But you're looking at a padlocked basement door, a cut phone line, and a scared kid who had to come ask strangers for help." He let those words sit. The engines behind him hummed like a steady drum. "You want to be part of that?" Ridge asked, voice low. "You want your name tied to exploiting an old woman? You want to be the kind of man who helps a coward keep his power?" Silence hung heavy. The hired men looked at each other, and Ridge watched their courage drain like water from a cracked cup. Men could talk tough in bars. Men could bluff when the victim was alone. But when the truth stood in a doorway under light, when witnesses surrounded the lie, courage didn't feel so sturdy. One of the men took a half-step back. He didn't announce it. He just drifted away from Doyle, like Doyle had started smelling rotten. Doyle's eyes went wide. "Hey," he hissed. "What are you doing?" The man shrugged, not meeting Doyle's gaze. "This ain't what you said it was." Another man nodded in agreement, jaw tight. "I'm not catching a charge over some old lady." The driver of the pickup muttered something under his breath, then climbed back into the cab. The door shut with a dull thud that sounded like a decision. Doyle's face twisted with disbelief and fury. "You're backing out?" he spat. "After I paid you?" "You paid us to scare somebody," one of them said, voice colder now. "You didn't say it was a kid and an old woman." One by one, they stepped away. Not running, not panicking. Just leaving. The sedan's engine turned over. The pickup's headlights shifted. Tires rolled slow as they pulled back from the line of bikes. Doyle stood alone in the street, his plan collapsing around him like a cheap tent in a storm, and that was when he finally looked at Maeve. Not the way a son looked at a mother. The way a captor looked at an escaped prisoner. Maeve didn't shrink. Her hands trembled, but her feet stayed planted. Cole stayed beside her, still gripping her sleeve, but his chin lifted a little higher than before. He wasn't hiding behind her anymore. He was standing with her. Doyle stared at them like he couldn't understand it. He had built his whole world on their fear. He had relied on it the way other men relied on money or muscle. Fear had been his currency. Fear had been his weapon. And now he saw it slipping away. "You think this is over?" Doyle snarled, voice quieter now, more dangerous. "You think you can take everything from me?" Ridge stepped forward a fraction, not aggressive, just undeniable. "You took everything from her," Ridge said. "You took her peace. You took her money. You took her voice. And you almost took that kid's childhood." Doyle's eyes burned with hate. "She's my mother." Ridge's voice stayed steady. "Then you should have acted like a son." For a moment, it looked like Doyle might lunge. His shoulders tensed, his hands flexed. His rage searched for an outlet. Ridge didn't move. The brothers didn't move. They were still. Waiting. Ready. Then red and blue lights flashed at the far end of the street. Law enforcement finally arrived, not in a rush, but in time. 2 cars rolled in, stopping with deliberate spacing. Doors opened. Officers stepped out with cautious posture, hands near belts, eyes scanning the wall of motorcycles, the line of men, the tense stillness that made the scene feel like a coiled spring. Knox moved forward calmly, holding his phone out like a file instead of a weapon. "We've documented everything," he said. "Padlock. Cut phone line. Basement conditions. Statements." The lead officer took the phone, scrolling, his face tightened with each image. This wasn't hearsay. This wasn't a messy argument. It was evidence clear, unavoidable. Maeve spoke again from the doorway, voice trembling but firm. "He locked me down there," she said. "He took my money. He threatened me. He cut my phone line so I couldn't call anyone." Cole's voice cracked when he added, "I heard her coughing," he whispered. "I gave her water through the door." The officer's gaze snapped to Doyle. Doyle opened his mouth, ready to lie, ready to spin, ready to shrink the truth again. But the truth was too big now. Too many witnesses. Too much proof. One of the officers stepped toward Doyle. "Sir," he said, voice firm, "turn around. Hands behind your back." Doyle's face twisted, panic flashing behind anger. This is ridiculous," he protested. "You can't. She's confused, these bikers." The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that felt final. Doyle didn't get beaten. He didn't get dragged through dirt. He got something worse for a man like him. He got exposed. He got finished. As the officers guided him toward the cruiser, Doyle twisted his head back toward Maeve and Cole, eyes wild. "You did this," he spat, the words aimed like knives. Maeve didn't flinch. Cole didn't flinch, and Doyle saw it. He saw the fear he'd relied on was gone, replaced by something he couldn't control: support, witnesses, brotherhood, a line of men who didn't need to hurt him to stop him. The cruiser door shut. The streetlights hummed overhead. The motorcycles stayed still, engines finally easing down as the moment released its grip. Ridge watched the police cars pull away, then turned slowly toward Maeve and Cole. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired in a deep way, like a man who'd carried something heavy and finally set it down without dropping it. Maeve stepped forward onto the porch, shoulders still trembling, but her chin lifted. Cole stayed beside her, closer now, not from fear, but from loyalty. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. Because the victory wasn't violence. The victory was restraint. And every person on that street, Maeve, Cole, Ridge, the brothers, even the officers, felt the weight of that truth settle into them, changing the shape of what they believed strength could be. The quiet that followed wasn't the fragile kind that snapped at the first sound. It was real quiet, the kind that settled into the bones of a place and stayed there. No engines idled in the street anymore, no headlights cut across the walls. The porch light hummed softly, steady and ordinary, like it had always wanted to be. Maeve stood in the doorway long after the police cars were gone, breathing in air that felt different now. Not because the house had changed, but because she had. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like space. The next days came slowly. Not with drama, but with paperwork, phone calls, and small decisions that used to feel impossible. Knox connected Maeve with people who knew how to untangle accounts and follow paper trails. A new bank account was opened, statements were reviewed. Dates and withdrawals lined up in a way that finally made sense. Each signature Maeve placed on a form felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She didn't do it alone anymore. Neighbors began to appear, tentative at first. A casserole left on the porch, a knock followed by an awkward offer of help. People who had lived nearby for years, people who had waved politely and minded their business, now standing a little closer. Maeve realized something quietly painful and quietly healing at the same time. She hadn't been invisible, she had been unheard. And now she was heard. Cole changed too, though not all at once. The jumpiness didn't vanish overnight. He still glanced at doors when they closed too hard. Still listened for footsteps that weren't coming. But he slept. Deeply, without waking up gasping or listening for keys. He stopped counting hours in the dark. When Ridge invited him to the garage one afternoon, Cole hesitated at first. The place that had once felt terrifying now felt familiar, almost safe. The smells were the same: oil, metal, leather. But they didn't carry fear anymore. They carried purpose. Ridge didn't put a wrench in Cole's hand right away. He let him watch. Let him listen. Let him learn how the men moved around one another without barking orders or shoving for space. Knox showed him how to organize tools. Mace explained why balance mattered more than speed. Ash taught him how to sit still and pay attention, how sometimes the most important thing was noticing what didn't change. Cole learned mechanics slowly, carefully, how engines breathed, how small adjustments made big differences. But he learned something else too. He learned patience. He learned that strength didn't have to be loud. He learned that men could be dangerous and gentle at the same time, depending on what the moment required. Maeve watched these changes from a distance at first, unsure if she was allowed to relax yet. But each day that passed without fear made her shoulders drop a little more. She began opening windows, letting sunlight stretch across the floors. The house responded in its own way. The stale air faded. The walls seemed less close. The basement door stayed open, the padlock gone, the darkness no longer hidden. Legal consequences moved forward with the steady pace of ink and signatures. Investigators followed the money. Statements were compared. Records told the story Doyle had tried to erase. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't loud, but it was thorough. Charges came not from fists, but from facts. Exploitation, fraud, abuse. Words that carried weight when backed by proof. Ridge kept his distance from that part. He didn't need to hover over the system to trust the work that had been done. He stayed watchful, but something in him eased. The tight coil that had lived between his shoulders for years loosened just a bit. He still scanned streets, still noted exits, still listened harder than most people ever would. But the old ache, the one that came from arriving too late, quieted. Sometimes he stood outside the Mercer house in the early morning, helmet in hand, listening to the sounds of a normal home waking up. A kettle heating, footsteps moving freely. Cole's voice drifting through an open window. Those sounds meant more to him than any victory speech. Maeve no longer apologized for needing help. She accepted it with a nod and a steady gaze. She spoke more, asked questions, made plans. She talked about repainting the living room, about planting something in the yard come spring, about the future in a way that didn't feel dangerous anymore. The house breathed again. Cole began to change in ways that were subtle but undeniable. His posture shifted, his eyes lifted. He laughed more easily. He still carried what had happened, but it no longer defined him. It informed him, strengthened him, gave him a sense of responsibility that didn't crush him anymore. One evening, Ridge handed Cole a small leather jacket. Not a cut, not a symbol to be worn lightly. Just a jacket that fit his shoulders and carried weight without meaning yet. Not now, Ridge said, seeing the question in Cole's eyes. When you're ready, you'll know. Cole nodded. He understood more than Ridge realized. The garage continued as it always had. Bikes came and went. Work got done. Brothers rotated through life's quiet and loud moments. But something lingered in the air now, a reminder that showing up mattered, that restraint could be stronger than violence. That protection, when done right, didn't demand anything in return. And the boy who once walked into a garage shaking and desperate began, slowly and surely, to become something more. Not because fear hardened him, but because courage had been met with presence. Silence is where abuse grows strong. It feeds on closed doors, on fear that keeps voices low, on the belief that no one will listen or care enough to act. In this story, silence almost won. It nearly swallowed an old woman and crushed a child beneath the weight of secrecy. But courage, even in its smallest form, starved it. One boy choosing to speak changed everything. Brotherhood reveals itself through action, not image. It is not patches, engines, or reputation. It is showing up without needing praise. It is staying when leaving would be easier. The men who stood that line did not do it for recognition. They did it because protection is a responsibility, not a performance. Family is not something you claim with blood alone. It is something you prove through care, sacrifice, and respect. A son who uses fear is no son at all. A group of strangers who step in, stay present, and protect the vulnerable can become family in every way that matters. True strength is not found in fists or threats. It is found in restraint. In choosing the harder path when the easier one would feel satisfying. In letting truth and justice do their work. Help does not always arrive from safe-looking places. Sometimes it comes from doors we were taught never to knock on. And redemption, more often than not, begins with a single brave voice refusing to stay quiet. Sometimes the biggest change doesn't come from power or strength, but from one scared kid who refuses to stay silent. One knock on the right door turned fear into protection, isolation into brotherhood, and a broken house back into a home. Stories like this remind us that courage doesn't have to be loud to matter, and doing the right thing can ripple farther than we ever expect. If this story meant something to you, take a second to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and answer this. Who would you protect if they knocked on your door asking for help? Brotherhood isn't loud, it just shows up.